Why was her chest tightening when all she had planned was another routine flight? The hum of the twin-engine Cessna 402 filled the cockpit, steady, familiar, the kind of sound a pilot could lose herself in. Mary Caldwell should have been calm. She had flown this route through the Colorado Rockies dozens of times. Her cargo bay was filled with medical supplies, the kind of cargo that gave purpose to her life, boxes of insulin, antibiotics, painkillers. For isolated mountain towns, these weren't just supplies. They were survival. But there was something different about the sky today. The clouds were starting to tower, building themselves into white walls along the horizon, hinting at the kind of storm that punished arrogance. And Mary knew the Rockies never forgave arrogance. She adjusted her heading, her eyes flicking across the gauges. Fuel steady, oil pressure good, everything routine. Yet inside she couldn't quiet the unease. It wasn't just the weather. It wasn't even the memories that always lived with her, her father, another pilot, lost to these same mountains when she was only 22. No, today's unease had roots deeper than the sky. It began with a 17-year-old girl sitting across from her at breakfast a week ago. Her daughter Jessica had looked her in the eye and said words Mary couldn't shake. "You always tell me not to judge people by how they look, Mom. But I see the way you freeze when those bikers come into town." Mary had laughed it off then, protested that it wasn't prejudice, just common sense. But Jessica hadn't let it go. Her sociology class had been talking about stereotypes, about unconscious bias, about how easy it was to write people off before even knowing them. Now, flying alone over a wilderness that could kill her in a minute, Mary wondered if her daughter had been right. Was she guilty of the very thing she warned Jessica against? The radio crackled, a burst of static breaking her thoughts. She reached to adjust the squelch, expecting the usual traffic from Clearwater Regional. But what came next wasn't routine. Any aircraft, this is emergency traffic." The voice was faint, jagged with panic, but unmistakably real. Mary sat forward, heart tightening. Few people used the emergency frequency unless lives were truly at stake. The transmission came again, stronger this time. "We have multiple casualties. Repeat, multiple casualties. Location approximately 10 miles northeast of Iron Mountain near Eagle's Nest Pass. We need immediate assistance." Mary froze. Her mind ran calculations instantly. 10 miles northeast, that was close to her route, close enough to see if she diverted. Her training took over. "Emergency traffic, this is Cessna 472 Mike Alpha. I'm 15 minutes from your location. Can you provide more details?" The reply came clearer now, strained but unmistakably human. 472 Mike Alpha, thank God. This is Joe Patterson. We've got 50 people trapped by a rockslide on Highway 285 near Eagle's Nest Pass. Multiple injuries, some serious. Weather moving in fast. We're cut off. Mary's blood chilled. 50 people. That was mass casualty scale. She tried to picture it. Tons of granite tearing down a mountain, crushing bikes, trapping men. Her instincts told her this was going to be bigger than anything she'd seen in 20 years of humanitarian flights. But then came the words that made her pulse throb in her ears. "We're the Iron Mountain Hells Angels, annual charity ride. The whole mountain came down on us about an hour ago. We've got guys pinned under rocks, broken bones, some unconscious." Hells Angels. Mary's grip tightened on the yoke. For a moment she thought she'd misheard, but the voice didn't waver. Every muscle in her body tensed with a flood of memory. Newspaper headlines, bar fights, arrest records, the patch on their backs that meant outlaw, the same patch that made her stiffen every time bikers rolled into town. And now they were calling her for help. She almost said nothing, almost turned the radio off and told herself she hadn't heard, but she could still hear Jessica's voice echoing from that breakfast table. "You judge them, Mom. You do." 50 men, fathers, husbands, volunteers if their claim about the charity ride was true. and now buried alive in the mountain she had loved since she was a girl. Mary pressed her mic. Her voice sounded steadier than she felt. "Joe Patterson, maintain this frequency. Guide me to your location. I'm declaring this an emergency." The relief in his voice came sharp, immediate. "God bless you, lady. We're on the north side of Eagle's Nest Pass, 200 yards east of the highway bridge. You can't miss the slide. We've spread orange blankets as markers." Mary banked left, setting her course for the pass. Her heart hammered harder than it had in years. The choice had been made, but not without cost. Because even as she turned her aircraft toward disaster, a deeper question gnawed at her. Would she save them because they were human, or would she hesitate because of the patches they wore? The mountains rose higher now, jagged against the crystalline September sky. Below, valleys narrowed, streams cut silver threads through pine forests. She'd flown this terrain all her life. Her father used to say these mountains were alive, that they listened, judged, decided who lived and who didn't. She wondered what judgment they were passing on her today. She thought about her father again, his plane caught in a downdraft, smashed into granite, gone before rescue could arrive. She'd spent years hatting those mountains, before finally surrendering to them, flying over them the way he had. Now maybe she would make his same choice, to risk herself for others. The radio came alive again, Joe Patterson's voice, urgent, ragged. "Miss, we've got 12 still trapped, 3 unconscious. We're doing what we can, but we don't have equipment. They're not gonna last long." Mary closed her eyes briefly, then opened them to the hard truth outside her cockpit. The storm was building faster now, black walls crawling east. Time wasn't a luxury anymore. Her other radio channel lit up with Iron Mountain Emergency Services. Susan Edwards, the search and rescue coordinator, came on. "Mary, we've heard about that slide. Details are sketchy. What's the situation?" Mary didn't sugarcoat it. 40 accounted for, 12 trapped, 3 unconscious. They need immediate medical extraction. The debris field is massive. A long pause, too long. Then Susan's voice returned, clipped, hesitant. "Mary, did you say this was a motorcycle club incident?" "Yes," Mary answered sharply. "Hell's Angels, but Susan, they're dying down there." Another pause, this one colder. "We need to coordinate with law enforcement before deploying. Sheriff Fischer is en route. Full response may take time." Mary's hands tightened on the controls, her jaw clenched. She heard the subtext as clearly as the static. "They're bikers. Don't expect us to hurry." Below her, 50 men were digging with bare hands to save their brothers. Above her, thunder rolled. And around her, prejudice built walls faster than any rockslide. Her voice broke through the silence of her cockpit. "Susan, delay is death. Weather is closing. If we wait for law enforcement to clear paperwork, those men won't make it." But Susan only repeated her promise to expedite as much as possible. Mary switched back to Joe's frequency. She could hear men shouting in the background, the scrape of rocks, a voice calling for water. "How much time do we have, Mary?" Joe's voice cracked through the static. She glanced at the horizon, at lightning flaring inside the black towers of cloud. 45 minutes, maybe less. There it was, the clock she couldn't stop. 45 minutes to decide if she was willing to cross the invisible line between prejudice and humanity. Her father's voice came back to her as if the mountains carried it. "Flying isn't about going from A to B, Mary. It's about judgment, and judgment means lives." She reached for her cell phone, praying for a signal. If the officials were going to drag their feet, she would build her own lifeline. The storm pressed closer. The voices below grew more desperate. And Mary Caldwell, humanitarian pilot, realized she was no longer flying supplies. She was flying into the judgment of her own soul. Why did her hands tremble as she tightened her grip on the yoke? Mary Caldwell had flown through turbulence that rattled teeth, landed on dirt strips barely wide enough for her wheels, and once navigated blind through a blizzard with only instinct and gauges to guide her. She was no stranger to fear, but fear wasn't what she felt now. This was something heavier. The weight of judgment. Her eyes swept the horizon, clouds climbing, swelling, turning black. The storm was no longer a question. It was a fact. She had 40 minutes, maybe less. And in that time she had to decide not just how to save lives, but whether she truly believed all lives deserved saving. The radio crackled again, Sheriff Carl Fischer's voice cutting sharp through the static. "Mary, I understand you've got eyes on the situation. Before we deploy, I need confirmation. These are known Hell's Angels, correct?" She hesitated. The sheriff's tone carried no sympathy, only suspicion. "Yes, they identified as the Iron Mountain chapter, charity ride en route to Denver." "Mary," Fischer replied, clipped and cold, "these men have records, drugs, violence. We can't just rush in blind." Her chest flared hot with anger. She stared at the devastation below as her aircraft banked low over Eagle's Nest Pass. From the air, it looked like a scar cut deep into the earth. The highway lay buried under a quarter-mile of rock and rubble, twisted chrome and shattered motorcycles jutting out like broken bones. Men in leather jackets clawed at the debris, some on their knees, some staggering with exhaustion, all of them fighting for lives beneath the stone. She saw gray-haired men lifting rocks with bleeding hands, younger ones kneeling beside injured riders, whispering words she couldn't hear but could guess: comfort, prayers, desperation. And across the broken landscape, flashes of orange from the emergency blankets they'd spread, signals of both distress and hope. Mary pressed her mic, her voice sharp. "Sheriff, I'm looking at fathers, veterans, husbands, not criminals. They need rescue, now." There was silence. Then Fischer came back, unmoved. "Maintain altitude, Mary. Do not land. We'll secure the scene once tactical assessment is complete." She wanted to scream. Tactical assessment. The storm would not wait for tactical anything. She shut off his channel before he could say another word. For the first time in her life, Mary Caldwell chose to disobey law enforcement. Switching back to Joe Patterson's frequency, she steadied her voice. "Joe, I see your people. I see the debris field. I need you to mark me a landing zone. I've got medical supplies on board." A pause, then Joe's reply raw with disbelief. "Mary, are you saying you're gonna land in this mess?" "I am," she said flatly. "But I need a flat area cleared 200 yards south of your position. Orange blankets for markers." The line went silent for 3 long seconds. Then his voice returned, softer. "Lady, I don't know what kind of angel you are, but we'll clear you a path." She lowered her altitude, heart racing, as she began her descent checklist. The cockpit filled with the sound of the storm breathing down her back. Gusts buffeted the Cessna, tilting her wings, making the gauges tremble. She landed in difficult terrain before, but never in the teeth of both weather and chaos. Every calculation screamed that the risk was too great. But her conscience screamed louder. She thought of Jessica again, the way her daughter had looked at her, almost disappointed when she insisted she wasn't prejudiced. If she turned away now, what kind of example would she be? What kind of mother, what kind of human? The altimeter ticked lower, 2,000 feet. Through the windscreen she saw movement, bikers clearing rocks, dragging debris, waving those orange blankets as makeshift runway guides. They looked impossibly small, impossibly fragile against the jagged scar of the mountain. 1,000 feet. Her headset crackled, another voice, urgent, official, Clearwater Tower. "Cessna 472 Mike Alpha, this is Clearwater Tower. We're monitoring. Mary, are you seriously attempting a landing at Eagle's Nest?" "Affirmative," she replied, steady but defiant. "Mary, you've got maybe 20 minutes before the storm makes that strip unflyable. Winds are picking up. If you go down there, you may not get back out." Her hand hovered over the throttle. She could turn away, leave the supplies, wait for the helicopters if they even came. But below she could see faces now. Not monsters, not mugshots. Men with dirt-streaked cheeks and tears cutting paths through the dust. One had pulled off his jacket, revealing a t-shirt with words she could read even from the air. Rocky Mountain Children's Hospital Charity Ride, 2025. The truth hit her like a physical blow. They hadn't been lying. They hadn't been raising hell. They'd been raising money for kids. She pressed her mic, cutting off the tower. "Clearwater, your advisories are noted. I'm committed." She killed the transmission before anyone could talk her out of it. 500 feet. Her stomach tightened. The landing zone loomed below, rough, uneven, nothing like a runway. Men waved blankets in the rising wind, their faces turned up to her, trusting her, begging her. 200 feet. She caught sight of a woman among them, long dark hair tied back, hands bloody but steady as she knelt beside an injured man. She moved like someone who knew medicine, who knew life and death. Joe had mentioned a nurse. This had to be her. 100 feet. The Cessna bucked in a crosswind, throwing her heart into her throat. She fought the controls, every muscle taut, her breath ragged. 50 feet. The landing zone rushed at her, too fast, too rough. She flared the nose, bled speed, prayed. The wheels hit. Hard. They bounced, skidded, threatened to slide sideways on loose rock. She wrestled with the yoke, braking gently, praying the landing gear held. Then stillness, engines whining down, the storm howling across the mountainside. And men running toward her. For a second, Mary sat frozen, her hands still clamped on the yoke. Her chest heaved with adrenaline, her vision blurred with the enormity of what she had just done. Then the cabin door swung open. The first face she saw was the woman with the dark hair. Her vest bore the Hell's Angels patch, but her eyes were a nurse's eyes. Steady, compassionate, exhausted but alive. "Ma'am," the woman said, voice rough but professional, "I can't tell you how much this means. I'm Sharon Baker. I used to work ER in Denver. We've got men bleeding out. Supplies." Mary nodded, already moving to the cargo bay. Her hands worked with practiced precision, hauling out boxes of bandages, IV kits, pain meds. Around her, leather-clad men formed a human chain, passing boxes, their voices shouting thanks, their eyes wide with gratitude she didn't deserve. She looked into their faces, expecting menace, arrogance. Instead, she saw fear, hope, desperation, the faces of men fighting for each other's lives. And in that moment, Mary Caldwell understood something she had never dared admit. Prejudice wasn't just cruel, it was easy. The storm wasn't waiting. Lightning licked across the horizon. The wind whipped her hair into her eyes as Sharon guided her toward a makeshift triage area. The cries of the wounded rose above the storm, raw, human, undeniable. Mary had crossed her line. There was no going back. Why did they all look at her like that, like she was the last lifeline they had? Mary Caldwell stepped out of her Cessna and into the storm's rising breath. The wind whipped across Eagle's Nest Pass, carrying the smell of wet stone and gasoline, the sharp tang of blood and dust. Around her, men with leather vests rushed forward, their faces etched with exhaustion, streaked with dirt and tears. She had expected menace. Scars, sneers, the kind of swagger that put fear into small towns. But what she saw instead froze her breath in her chest. Hoping. 50 pairs of eyes that had already faced death and still carried the stubborn will to live. The first to reach her was Sharon Baker, the woman she'd spotted from the cockpit. Sharon's hands were bloodied, her clothes torn, her vest heavy with patches, but her voice carried steady authority. "Saline, pressure bandages, painkillers, whatever you've got. I've got one man with crush injuries, 2 unconscious and another bleeding internally. We're running out of time." Mary dropped to her knees beside the cargo bay, pulling open boxes. The sound of cardboard tearing mixed with the storm's growing howl. She handed over bandages, IV bags, antibiotics. Around them, the men formed a human chain, distributing supplies with urgent precision. She looked at their hands, calloused, scarred, trembling with effort. Not hands of villains, she thought. Hands of fathers, workers, veterans. One of them, older, heavyset, streaks of silver in his hair, approached. His bearing was calm, commanding. His vest marked him as Iron Joe. His handshake was firm, his eyes direct. "Miss Caldwell, Joe Patterson, we spoke on the radio." Mary nodded. "What's your casualty count?" "4 trapped, 12 seriously injured. Tommy Walsh is the worst. Rock the size of a truck crushed his legs. He's been conscious off and on. Sharon's keeping him alive, but—" His words trailed into the wind. Mary followed him through the chaos. Every step was a reminder of how quickly life could be broken. Motorcycles lay twisted under boulders, chrome and steel bent beyond recognition, jackets ripped, blood staining the ground. But everywhere she looked, she saw something she hadn't expected: brotherhood. A young man with a bandaged head cradled an older rider, whispering encouragement while ignoring his own wounds. 2 bikers tore leather jackets into strips to improvise splints. Another sang softly, voice cracked, trying to keep a trapped friend from slipping into unconsciousness. Mary felt her throat tighten. This wasn't chaos. It was love, raw and unfiltered, holding back despair. They reached the triage area. Sharon knelt beside Tommy Walsh, the man pinned beneath the massive boulder. His face was pale, lips cracked, eyes half-lidded with pain. Yet when he saw Mary, his mouth twisted into a weak grin. "Well, hell, the angel flew down after all." Mary knelt beside him, her hands moving automatically to check his pulse, note the shallow rhythm, feel the cold sweat on his skin. A wedding ring caught her eye. A photo of a smiling woman and 2 kids was tucked into the clear sleeve of his vest. "Tommy," she whispered, "we're going to get you out." He shook his head faintly. "Don't waste your breath on me, ma'am. Take care of the others first. I've had my time, they haven't." The selflessness in his words cut through her like a blade. Here was a man dying under a mountain of stone, and all he cared about was the lives of the men beside him. Sharon's voice broke the moment. "He's losing blood pressure. We need IV fluids now." Mary handed over a bag, watching Sharon work with the speed of someone who had done this too many times before. Her movements were clinical, practiced, her voice calm as she directed 2 bikers to hold Tommy steady. "Mary," Sharon said without looking up, "you ever set an IV?" Mary blinked. "Once, years ago." "Then you're doing it again. Take his arm." Mary's hands shook as she slipped the needle into Tommy's vein. The memory of flight training came back, her father's words about calm hands in crisis. She found the vein, pushed the catheter, taped it down. Fluid began dripping into the line. Tommy let out a slow sigh. "That's better, Angel." Mary's throat closed around the lump rising there. The storm cracked overhead, lightning splitting the sky. Thunder rolled across the pass, deep enough to rattle the rocks. Rain began to fall in scattered drops, cold and heavy. "Storm here," Joe muttered, scanning the sky. "We've got minutes." Mary's radio came alive again, Sheriff Fisher's voice, sharp with command. "Mary, report, what's your status?" She looked around her. Men covered in dirt and blood. A woman saving lives with hands society had dismissed. A dying man thanking her for fluids she'd nearly been too prejudiced to deliver. She pressed the mic, her voice shook with anger. "Sheriff, what I see is a humanitarian crisis. If you delay, they die." "Mary," Fisher replied, "you need to let us handle this. Secure the scene. These men are dangerous." Her patience snapped. "The only danger here is the storm and your prejudice." She shut off the radio. The silence that followed felt like defiance itself. Another shout rose nearby. Mary turned to see a young biker, no more than 20, clawing at rocks with his bare hands, sobbing. A man was trapped beneath, barely visible, his chest rising faintly. Mary ran to him, dropped beside the young man. His arms were bleeding from cuts, his fingers raw. "He saved me," the boy gasped, voice breaking. "2 years ago, I'd have been dead in a bar fight if not for him. I can't let him die here." Mary's chest tightened. Mentorship, loyalty, sacrifice, everything she'd never associated with this club. And yet it was right here in front of her, undeniable. She grabbed a length of metal pipe Doug, the club mechanic, had fashioned into a lever. Together, they jammed it under the rock. Pride screamed with effort. The stone shifted, just enough. Hands pulled the trapped man free. He wasn't breathing. Sharon dropped beside him, performing chest compressions with practiced force. "Don't you quit on me, Iron," she shouted. "Not now." Mary knelt, helping, counting under her breath. Each push was a prayer. The man coughed, a wet gasping sound, air, life. The cheer that went up cut through the storm like sunlight. For one fleeting moment, hope won. But lightning split the sky again, closer now. Rain began to pour in sheets. Wind whipped through the pass, tearing at blankets, at makeshift shelters. The storm was here in full. Mary looked around at the chaos. Men digging with renewed desperation. Others shielding the injured with their own bodies. Sharon shouting orders through the rain. And she realized something that would stay with her forever. They weren't outlaws in this moment. They weren't criminals. They were brothers, family, human beings fighting for each other's lives. And she had crossed into their fight. The storm screamed. Rocks shifted with fresh slides. The clock was gone now. Every second mattered. And Mary Caldwell knew she couldn't fly away even if she wanted to. Why did the thunder sound like it was aimed directly at them? The storm had arrived with no mercy. Rain fell in jagged sheets, turning the rubble into slick stone and mud. Wind howled down the pass like some living beast, tearing at jackets, at blankets, at the fragile order they'd carved into the chaos. Lightning split the sky again, so close Mary felt the crackle in her teeth. Men didn't even flinch. They kept digging, kept hauling, kept bleeding. Mary Caldwell moved with them now, her clothes soaked, her hair plastered to her face. She carried bandages one moment, hauled rocks the next, her arms aching, lungs burning. This wasn't her world. She was a pilot, not a first responder, not a rescuer. But here, no one had the luxury of titles. Here, everyone worked or someone died. She crouched beside Sharon, who was kneeling in the mud with her hands pressed hard against a man's chest wound. The man gasped, blood bubbling at the corners of his mouth. Sharon's voice was steady but urgent. "Mary, morphine left box, and pressure dressing, hurry." Mary's hands flew, fumbling with slick gloves, pulling out the syringe. Her stomach clenched. Every second mattered, but the rain blurred her vision, her fingers slipping. She forced herself to breathe steady, inject carefully, tape the dressing. The man's eyes fluttered, then fixed on Mary. His lips moved. She bent close to hear. "Tell my boy I rode clean today. Tell him that." Mary swallowed hard. She had no idea what rode clean meant, but she understood the plea. To be remembered with dignity, to leave something behind. She nodded, pressing his hand. "I'll tell him." He exhaled, and for a terrifying moment she thought that was the end. But then his chest rose again, faint but stubborn. The storm screamed louder, as if trying to drown them all. Across the debris field, Joe Patterson's voice boomed over the wind. "Riders, rock shift on the north side. Watch your footing." Mary turned just in time to see part of the slide shift under the pounding rain. Rocks tumbled down, crashing against twisted bikes. A younger rider lost his footing and slid, screaming, until two others grabbed him by the vest and hauled him back. The sheer force of their grip, their refusal to let go, burned itself into Mary's mind. For a heartbeat, she thought of Jessica. Her daughter had always said family wasn't about perfection, but about presence, about showing up when it mattered. Looking at these men, Mary realized Jessica had been right all along. She staggered back to the triage area where Tommy Walsh still lay pinned under the boulder. Sharon was at his side, her lips pale, her hands trembling with exhaustion. He's fatting, Mary, his pressure's dropping. Mary dropped beside him. What can we do? Sharon shook her head, rain dripping from her lashes. We need machinery. A winch, hydraulic spreaders, something. We can't move this by hand. Mary glanced at the massive rock crushing Tommy's legs. It weighed tons. Impossible. But Tommy's eyes were still open, glassy but aware. Angel, he whispered, voice barely audible, don't let me die under this mountain. Not like an animal. Mary's throat burned. She gripped his hand, feeling the weak squeeze of his fingers. The storm's roar couldn't drown out his plea. She forced her voice steady. You're not dying today, Tommy, not while I'm here. But inside, she wondered if she had just lied. Another shout broke the moment. A biker came running, his voice sharp. Rock slide on the west end, 2 more trapped. Mary looked at Sharon, torn. They both knew what it meant, spread thinner, pulled apart. Sharon's eyes hardened. Go, I'll keep him alive, go. Mary sprinted with the others toward the west end. Her boots slipped in the mud, her heart pounding. She reached the new collapse, a mess of boulders piled over what had once been the highway. 2 men were pinned. One screamed with every breath, his leg crushed under stone. The other didn't move at all. The bikers attacked the pile with everything they had, bare hands, pipes, even motorcycle parts used as levers. Mary dropped beside them, heaving, clawing, the rain soaking her to the bone. Her arms shook with exhaustion, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. Minutes blurred into eternity. At last, the first man came free, his leg mangled but intact. He cried out in pain, gripping the arms of his brothers as they carried him to triage. But the second man. When they pulled him clear, Mary saw the stillness in his face, the pallor, the silence. Sharon knelt, tried compressions, tried breath after breath. The storm seemed to pause with them, waiting. Finally, Sharon stopped. Her hands dropped, trembling. Her eyes glistened with rain and tears. She shook her head. The bikers around them bowed their heads. One whispered a prayer. Another pressed his forehead to the man's vest, whispering, "Ride in peace, brother." Mary felt a heaviness press into her chest. Death had arrived, and with it, the brutal reminder that they couldn't save everyone. Her radio crackled again. Sheriff Fischer. Mary, status report. What's happening down there? She stared at the dead man on the ground, at the storm ripping the world apart around her. She pressed the mic. Sheriff, what's happening is men are dying while you sit in a warm truck. Static, then silence. The bikers lifted their fallen brother carefully, as if he were sacred. They laid him beneath a tarp, covering his face with gentle hands. Even in grief, there was dignity. Mary turned away, her eyes burning. She had always thought of them as reckless, lawless, heartless. But in this moment, they showed more honor in their grief than she'd ever expected. Another crash echoed through the pass, thunder, or more rock shifting, she couldn't tell. The storm had reached its full fury now. Rain turned the earth into rivers of mud, lightning struck ridgelines. The mountain itself seemed to growl with anger. Mary looked around at the chaos. Injured men groaning, others digging, Sharon still fighting for Tommy's life. And she realized the storm outside was nothing compared to the storm inside her. Because everything she thought she knew about these men was crumbling. And with every life she touched, every hand she held, she felt the weight of her own prejudice breaking apart, like a landslide inside her soul. Why did it feel like the mountain itself wanted them buried? The storm pounded Eagle's Nest Pass with a fury that seemed personal. Sheets of rain turned the highway into a river of mud. Lightning clawed at the ridgelines. Thunder cracked so loud the ground shook under their knees. Every few minutes the rocks shifted again, sending fresh cascades tumbling down, threatening to bury them all. Mary Caldwell could barely hear her own thoughts over the storm's roar. She moved from one broken body to the next, her hands slick with blood and rain, her arms aching from lifting, pulling, pressing. The air was filled with cries of pain, of rage, of grief. And still, impossibly, the men kept working. She saw Joe Patterson, his broad frame bent under the weight of a beam he was dragging with two others. He should have collapsed hours ago, but his eyes burned with something Mary recognized, the refusal to give up while any brother still breathed. She saw Sharon kneeling by Tommy Walsh, her lips moving silently, maybe counting, maybe praying, as she adjusted IV lines with fingers trembling from exhaustion. Lightning lit her face, and Mary saw the streaks of dirt and blood like war paint. And she saw the younger riders, boys really, digging with bleeding hands, crying out names into the storm, refusing to stop. Mary wanted to believe she had nothing left, that her body couldn't go on. But then she'd look into one of their faces, raw, broken, desperate, and something inside her would force her to move again. The storm didn't care. The storm didn't pause, but neither did they. A sudden scream cut through the night. Mary turned. One of the bikers was down, clutching his chest, not from falling rock, not from blood loss. His body convulsed in the mud, his face turning gray. "Heart attack," Sharon shouted, already moving. Mary was there in seconds. She dropped beside Sharon, their knees sinking into mud as they rolled the man onto his back. Lightning flashed again, illuminating his vest, a skull and wings stretched across leather. Mary had hated that symbol once. Now all she saw was a man's life slipping away. "Compressors now," Sharon barked. Mary locked her hands together and started chest compressions, pressing hard, counting under her breath. Sharon breathed for him, the storm beating around them like a drum of war. 1, 2, 3, 4. Mary's arms screamed in protest. Her chest burned. She wanted to stop, wanted to say it was hopeless, but she couldn't. Not when the man's brothers stood around, eyes wide with terror, whispering prayers into the storm. "Come on, breathe, please breathe." 30 compressions. Sharon breathed again, lightning cracked. The man gasped, coughed, his chest rose on its own. A cheer broke out, raw, ragged, defiant against the storm. Mary sat back, her arms shaking, her breath coming in sobs. One of the younger riders dropped to his knees beside her. He grabbed her hand with dirty fingers, tears cutting tracks down his face. "You saved him. You saved my uncle." Mary couldn't speak. She just squeezed his hand, the weight of it breaking her open inside. Because she had judged these men all her life. And here, in the storm, one of them was looking at her with the same reverence she once reserved only for doctors and saints. The storm wasn't letting up. Another rockslide thundered down nearby, close enough to spray them with shards of stone. Men dove for cover, dragging the injured with them. Mary felt her heart seize. If the mountain gave way completely, they'd all be buried. She grabbed her radio, flicked it back on. "Clearwater, this is Caldwell. We need evacuation now. Helicopters, heavy equipment, anything. Do you copy?" Static, then the tower's voice broken by interference. "Negative, Caldwell, storm too strong. Birds can't fly in this. You're on your own until it passes." "On your own." She shut her eyes for a moment, the words hammering into her. 50 lives, no rescue, and a storm that wanted them gone. When she opened her eyes again, she saw Tommy Walsh still pinned beneath that massive rock. His face was pale, lips trembling, but his eyes found hers through the storm. "Angel," he whispered again, voice so faint she had to kneel to hear it. "Don't quit on us." Mary pressed her forehead to his for one brief second, rain mixing with tears. "I won't." She didn't know if it was a promise to him or to herself, maybe both. The night dragged on, hour after brutal hour. They fought the storm, fought the rock, fought the weight of despair itself. They improvised splints from handlebars, used jackets for stretchers, burned fuel from a wrecked bike just to keep one unconscious man warm. Mary worked until her body felt hollow, until every movement came from sheer willpower alone. And through it all, something shifted inside her. She had come here as a pilot. She had landed as a rescuer. But now, standing shoulder to shoulder with men she had once feared, she realized the truth. She wasn't an outsider anymore. She was one of them. Not a biker, not a sister, but something deeper, someone who shared in their fight, their grief, their desperate hope. The storm raged on. The mountain groaned. Death hovered at the edges. But in the heart of it, Mary Caldwell felt something she hadn't felt in years. Purpose. And for the first time, she wasn't afraid of the storm. Why did the silence between thunderclaps feel louder than the storm itself? Mary Caldwell stood in the mud, chest heaving, staring at the faces around her. For a brief heartbeat, after saving the man's life with chest compressions, hope had felt real. But hope in a storm was fragile, and it never lasted long. The mountain moved again. A roar like the earth itself tearing open thundered from the ridgeline. Boulders tumbled, some the size of cars, smashing into the debris field with devastating force. Men screamed warnings, dove for cover, dragged the injured wherever they could. The ground shuddered, sending Mary sprawling into the mud. When she looked up, the world was chaos. The triage area was half buried in new rubble. One of the makeshift tarps had been shredded, the body beneath it uncovered again, the dead man's face pale and rain-washed. Tommy Walsh groaned under his boulder, the fresh slide jarring his body, Sharon scrambling to shield him with her own frame. "Angel," Tommy gasped, "it's not done with us yet." Mary stumbled to her feet, sprinting through the storm. She dropped beside them, pressing her hands against his shoulder, as if her small weight could hold him steady against the weight of the mountain. Sharon's voice shook for the first time. "He's losing consciousness, Mary. I don't know how much longer he can last." Mary looked at the boulder, immovable, merciless, a tomb waiting to close. Her throat tightened until she could barely breathe. "No," she whispered, "not yet, not like this." Joe Patterson arrived, rain dripping from his beard, his face grim. "Mary, Sharon, we've tried everything. That rock, not moving without machinery." Mary shook her head violently. "Then we keep him alive until machinery gets here." Joe's eyes softened. "That storm won't let anyone fly in, you know it. You landed by miracle, no one else is coming." Her chest burned with fury. At the mountain, at the storm, at fate itself. She pressed her forehead to Tommy again, rain running down both their faces. "You hold on," she whispered. "You hear me, you don't quit." His lips twitched in the faintest smile. "Bossy angel." Lightning split the sky again, so close it blinded her. The crack of thunder rattled every bone in her body. When her vision cleared, she saw something that nearly broke her. One of the younger riders, the boy who had thanked her for saving his uncle, was on his knees in the mud, holding the limp body of another biker. His voice was hoarse, his cries ragged. "No, no, no, don't you leave me." Mary's body moved before her mind caught up. She dropped beside them, fingers searching for a pulse. Nothing. She started compressions, pressing with everything she had left, whispering numbers, whispering prayers. The boy clung to the man's hand, tears streaming down his face. "He raised me, Angel. He raised me when no one else would. Please don't let him go." Mary pushed harder, her arms shaking. Sharon arrived, breath for him, shouted counts into the storm. Minutes dragged, nothing. Finally Sharon stopped. Her hands fell into the mud. Her eyes glistened with rain and grief. She shook her head. Mary sat back, chest heaving, her own tears mixing with rain. The boy's cries tore through her like shrapnel. He pressed his forehead to the man's chest, rocking him gently, whispering words only family would say. And Mary realized that's exactly what they were. Family, not by blood, but by bond, stronger maybe than most families she had ever seen. Her radio crackled again, Fisher's voice sharp, demanding. "Caldwell report. We're getting word of multiple fatalities. Confirm." Mary stared at the boy in the mud, at Sharon fighting for Tommy's fatting life, at men clawing rocks with bleeding fingers. Her voice shook with fury as she pressed the mic. "Sheriff, what I confirm is this. Your judgment is killing them faster than the mountain." Static, then silence. She ripped the radio off her vest and threw it into the mud. For the first time in years, she chose silence over authority. The storm pressed harder, as if angry at her defiance. Wind whipped her hair across her face, lightning strobed the pass like a war zone. She looked around, saw despair etching itself into faces. Men slumped, too exhausted to lift another rock. The boy still clutched his father figure's body. Sharon's hands trembled so badly she nearly dropped the IV line. And Mary felt something rising inside her, not despair, not yet, something hotter. Rage. She pushed to her feet, rain streaming down her face, her voice raw as she shouted into the storm. "No, you don't take them, not while I'm here." Dozens of eyes turned to her, some wide with shock, others with something else, hope. Joe Patterson's voice rose beside her, echoing her defiance. "You heard the angel, we fight. We don't stop until every brother's out." A roar went up, raw, primal, desperate. Men who had been ready to collapse found strength again. They surged back into the debris, shouting, digging, bleeding all over again. Mary dropped back into the mud beside them, her body screaming with pain, her mind burning with one truth. The storm could take her, the mountain could bury her, but she would not stop. Not while anyone still breathed. The night dragged into something timeless. Minutes felt like hours, hours like lifetimes. Mary lost track of how many compressions, how many bandages, how many broken men she touched. The storm raged, but they raged back. And somewhere in the middle of that endless fight, something broke open inside her. She saw the bikers not as outlaws, not as stereotypes, but as men who loved, who mourned, who fought for each other. And she realized she was no longer just saving them. They were saving her. Saving her from the prejudice she hadn't wanted to admit. Saving her from the hollow life she'd been living since her father's death. Saving her from the lie that dignity belonged only to the deserving. The storm raged on. Death hovered close, but Mary Caldwell's soul, for the first time in years, felt alive. Why did the mountain sound like it was breathing? Mary Caldwell stood in the mud, her body trembling from exhaustion, her arms streaked with dirt and blood. Around her, the hell's angels dug and clawed and bled, their voices hoarse from shouting names, from crying out prayers that seemed swallowed by the storm. But beneath the thunder, beneath the rain, there was something else. A low rumble, a vibration through the ground. She froze, so did Joe Patterson. Their eyes met in the strobe of lightning. "The ridge," Joe muttered, "it's gonna give." A scream tore through the pass. "Slide, slide on the east wall." Mary's heart seized. She spun and saw it. A wall of stone and mud breaking free, tumbling toward them with the unstoppable weight of the earth itself. "Run," Joe bellowed. Men scattered. Some grabbed the injured, dragging them with desperate strength. Others threw themselves over the helpless, forming human shields. Sharon screamed for help as she tried to protect Tommy, still pinned under the boulder. Mary didn't think. She sprinted toward them, mud sucking at her boots, rain blinding her eyes. The roar grew louder, closer, a living monster charging down the mountain. She dropped beside Sharon, bracing herself against the massive rock. "We have to move him." Sharon's eyes were wild with desperation. He's trapped." Tommy's lips moved, faint, broken. "Go, leave me." Mary shook her head violently, tears mixing with rain. "No, we don't leave anyone." The slide was seconds away now, a thunderous wall of death. Joe appeared with 3 bikers, their faces set with grim resolve. Without a word, they jammed pipes and beams under the boulder, heaving with everything they had. Muscles strained, teeth clenched, roars tore from their throats. The rock shifted, an inch, another. Again, Mary shouted, "Push." The slide thundered closer, shaking the ground, lightning painting the world white. With one last desperate heave, the boulder rolled just enough. Tommy's crushed legs came free. He screamed, a raw, guttural sound, but he was alive. "Grab him," Joe roared. Mary and Sharon hauled Tommy onto a jacket stretched as a stretcher. 4 men lifted him, running as the slide tore into the debris field. Rocks and mud slammed down, smashing motorcycles, burying what was left of the highway. The ground shook so violently Mary nearly fell. She felt the spray of shattered stone cut across her cheek. But when the roar finally faded, when the storm's voice dropped back to wind and thunder, they were still alive. Barely. The pass looked unrecognizable. Whole sections of the slide were gone, replaced by fresh scars of mud and stone. The triage area was buried. So were several bikes, and under the new rubble, silence where men had been moments before. Mary's chest caved in. Oh God. They dug, frenzied, desperate, clawing at the new slide with bare hands. Some men were pulled free alive, coughing mud, gasping air. Others weren't. Sharon wept openly now, even as she worked, her hands never stopping. Joe's voice cracked as he called names into the rubble. Some answered, some never would. Mary felt herself unraveling. Too many bodies, too much silence. For every man they saved, 2 more seemed lost. She wanted to scream, to collapse, to let the storm take her too. But then she saw Jessica's face in her mind. Her daughter's eyes, steady, unblinking, the way she'd challenged her at the breakfast table. "You judge them, Mom, you do." Mary clenched her fists. Not anymore. She dropped back into the mud, digging, screaming with effort, blood running from her nails. Every rock she pulled was another second of defiance. Another act of faith that someone might still be alive. At last a sound, weak, a groan. "Here," she shouted, "someone's here." Men surged to her side, clawing, prying. Together they freed a biker half buried, his legs shattered but his eyes alive. He clutched Mary's arm, his voice shaking. Thought we were done. Angel, you came back." Her throat closed, she gripped his hand. "I'm not leaving." The storm still raged, but something had shifted. The men looked at her differently now, not as an outsider, not as just a pilot who dropped from the sky. As one of them. The night bled into dawn without mercy. The rain eased to a steady downpour, the lightning retreated, but the damage was done. The pass was a graveyard of steel and stone. The wounded lay in rows, tended by shaking hands. The dead were covered with jackets, honored with whispered prayers. Mary sat in the mud, her body wrecked, her soul scraped raw. Tommy lay beside her, pale but alive, Sharon still holding his hand. Joe stood nearby, his face carved with grief but his eyes unbroken. No helicopters had come, no rescuers had arrived. They had been abandoned. But they hadn't abandoned each other. Mary lifted her head to the gray dawn sky. The storm had spent itself, for now. And in the silence that followed, broken only by the groans of the living and the weeping for the lost, she felt something she hadn't in years. Not relief, not victory. Belonging. Why did the quiet after a storm feel heavier than the storm itself? The first light of morning bled across Eagle's Nest Pass, pale and gray, washing the wreckage in cold truth. The rain had eased to a drizzle, the clouds still hanging low, but the rage of the storm was gone. What it left behind was worse than noise. Silence. Mary Caldwell sat in the mud, her body trembling with exhaustion, her clothes stiff with blood and dirt. Around her, the Hell's Angels were ghosts of themselves, eyes hollow, movements slow, hands raw from clawing stone through the night. Some sat with heads bowed, others knelt beside the still forms of brothers who hadn't made it. Jackets covered the dead. Patches that once felt like symbols of menace now marked men who had fought until their last breath. For hours they had been alone. No sirens, no choppers, no rescue, just 50 men, a nurse, and a pilot clawing survival out of the teeth of the Rockies. Now faint in the distance came the thump of blades, helicopters. Mary lifted her head, her chest tightening. She should have felt relief. Instead she felt something else. Too late. The first helicopter appeared over the ridgeline, painted in rescue white and red, rotors scattering mist into the dawn. Others followed, medevac birds, law enforcement, search and rescue. They descended on the pass like vultures, filling the silence with the thunder of machines. The bikers didn't cheer. They only watched, hollow-eyed, as strangers in clean uniforms and bright helmets poured into their graveyard. Sharon stood slowly, her body swaying with fatigue, her hands still gripping Tommy. Her eyes were red, her voice hoarse. Finally. But it didn't sound like relief. It sounded like accusation. Mary rose with her, her legs stiff, her body aching. She looked at the rescuers moving among them, cataloging the injured, tagging the dead, taking control as if they had been there all along. The sheriff came too, Carl Fischer, his uniform pressed, his boots clean. He moved carefully among the wreckage, his face unreadable. He stopped when he saw Mary. For a moment neither spoke. Then Fischer said, "You disobeyed direct orders." Mary stared at him, at his clean boots, at the way his eyes never lingered too long on the dead. She felt a rage so deep it nearly buckled her knees. 50 men, she whispered, her voice raw, and you made me choose between your orders and their lives. Fisher's jaw tightened. They're criminals, Mary, you don't know what they've done. Her voice cracked, but not from weakness, from fury. I know what they did here. They held each other while they died. They clawed rocks barehanded to save their brothers. They prayed for their families. They fought until the mountain swallowed them. That's what they've done. Fisher's gaze faltered just for a heartbeat. Then he turned away, barking orders to his deputies. Mary felt Sharon's hand squeeze hers. Not thanks, solidarity. Hours passed in a blur. The helicopters ferried the injured out one by one. Tommy was lifted last, pale but alive, Sharon climbing in beside him. She caught Mary's gaze through the open door and mouthed 2 words. Don't forget. Then she was gone, carried into the sky. The dead remained, covered with jackets, guarded by brothers who refused to leave them. Mary stood with Joe Patterson as the last of the medevac birds lifted away. His face was lined with exhaustion, his beard matted with blood and mud, but his eyes were steady. You didn't have to stay, he said quietly. Mary's throat tightened. I couldn't leave. Joe nodded, as if he'd expected that answer. He looked out over the ruined pass at the bodies of men he had led, men he had loved. His voice was low, almost reverent. You saved more than lives here, Angel. You saved dignity. That matters too. Mary swallowed hard, her chest aching. I didn't do it alone. He gave a faint smile. That's the point. The helicopters dwindled into the distance. The sheriff's men finished their notes. The storm clouds broke, letting sunlight pour across the scarred mountainside. Mary looked at her plane, still sitting where she had landed by miracle. She doubted it would ever fly again, but maybe that was fitting. She had landed one kind of woman, she would leave another. Hours later, when she finally drove away from Eagle's Nest Pass, she carried more than exhaustion. She carried memory. The sound of men clawing stone for each other, the cries of brothers in grief, the way Tommy Walsh had whispered, "Don't quit on us." And she carried her daughter's voice. You judge them, Mom, you do. She wasn't sure how she would explain all this to Jessica, how she would put into words the storm, the death, the humanity she had seen in the very men she had once dismissed. But maybe she didn't need words. Maybe the lesson wasn't something you told. Maybe it was something you lived. As the mountains fell away in her rearview mirror, Mary Caldwell whispered into the silence of her car. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. And for the first time in years, she believed it.